crab scratch is an iconic technique with a big reputation, and it seems to be a technique that beginners are always in a hurry to learn, but in my opinion it's probably one of the most overly used and misunderstood scratch techniques. A lot of people assume it's a power scratch because it requires multiple fingers and can sound very technical. However, it actually doesn't take a lot of power to execute. This is a mistake that a lot of beginners make. What actually works best is relaxed fingers and a light touch on the crossfader. As with most scratch techniques, a sharp and loose crossfader is essential, and it's technically a method of operating the crossfader rather than a clearly defined series of steps together with your platter hand. Crabs can be done in two ways, either with the crossfader starting closed and ending closed, known as closed crabs, or with the crossfader starting and ending open, known as open crabs. This doesn't mean that you can't combine the two, because crabs are really quite open to your own interpretation, and depending on what techniques you're combining them with may determine what position you leave the crossfader in. But for now, let's break down the two separate styles. For the closed crab, I'd recommend training by using a clear and really long sound, preferably a tone of a fixed pitch that can be looped to play constantly on your scratch deck. I'm using this sound from the Digital DJ Tips Toolkit number 2, which I've looped so that it never ends. Alternatively, you could just create a tiny loop on any sound so that it creates a constant tone. So let's start off with closed crabs. We're going to focus only on our fader hand to begin with, and as I said earlier, closed crabs begin and end with the crossfader closed. So the technique behind closed crabs is for each of our 4 fingers to briefly open the crossfader in sequence so that the sound playing on the scratch deck is chopped into tiny pieces, creating a stuttered effect. The crossfader needs to remain closed before and after each finger opens it. So the key here is to apply the right amount of pressure from both sides of the crossfader. Think of your thumb as a gentle springboard which will immediately bounce the crossfader closed whenever a finger opens it, similar to how it does for transformers and stabs. The finger sequence for all crabs start with our little finger and ends with our pointer finger. So here's the technique slowed down. Gently rest your thumb against the crossfader and starting with your little finger, snap each finger against the crossfader one by one. Make sure that your thumb applies the right amount of force to allow each finger to open the crossfader briefly before springing it closed again. So if you're doing it right, you should hear the crossfader click 4 times to the closed position. I believe the key to doing the crab movements correctly on the crossfader is to practice slowly, perhaps away from your decks entirely. Each of your fingers needs to be equally spaced apart before you start the sequence, and they each need to gently snap against your thumb. But whilst doing that, you need to try and keep your thumb as still as possible. So spread your fingers wide with an even space between them and let each finger come to your thumb as opposed to the other way around. You'll probably need to make your whole hand more narrow with the goal of bringing each finger down to your thumb in as straight a line as possible. It's not a natural position for your hand to be in, so don't worry if it feels uncomfortable. So that's the fader movements. Let's now press play on our tone sample and apply our closed crab technique to the crossfader. If you're doing it right, you should get a stuttered sound, which is basically 4 short sounds close together, 1 for each finger. It's difficult to engage all 4 of your fingers, but like I said, the key is to be relaxed and not to force the movements. Once you're comfortable with the fader technique, practice doing close crabs at different speeds. And to take them to the next level, use your platter hand at the same time to manipulate the direction and pitch of your sound, either with the deck playing or with the deck paused. That's all I have to share with you about closed crabs. It's open to your own interpretation, so just experiment with different speeds, different scratch sounds, and work out for yourself how you want to use them.